The frigid wind howled across the Wyoming plains, cutting through Rose Lawson's woolen coat as she stumbled through knee-deep snow, watching in horror as the wagon train disappeared into the white haze. "Wait!" she screamed, her voice lost in the blizzard as the last wagon's lantern faded into nothingness, leaving her alone in the gathering darkness of the December 1868 evening. Rose had only stepped away from the wagon train to retrieve her journal that had fallen during a brief stop, but in the mere minutes it took to find it buried in the fresh powder. The train had moved on unaware. They'd left a 22-year-old woman behind to face certain death in the brutal Wyoming winter. The tears froze on her cheeks as she wrapped her arms around herself, the reality of her situation setting in. The wagon master had warned them all about the approaching storm, insisting they make haste toward Medicine Bow. Now, the snow fell so heavily that Rose could barely see 10 feet ahead, and the temperature was dropping rapidly with the setting sun. "I'm going to die out here," she whispered, her breath a white cloud dissolving into the darkening sky. The nearest settlement was still miles away, and no one would realize she was missing until they made camp for the night, too late to send anyone back in this weather. Rose trudged forward, following the rapidly disappearing tracks of the wagon train. Her feet grew numb inside her boots, and her fingers, despite being wrapped in mittens, lost all feeling. The bitter cold seeped into her bones, making each step more difficult than the last. As darkness enveloped the landscape, Rose could no longer see the tracks. Disoriented and exhausted, she fell to her knees in the snow, her strength abandoning her. The journal she'd risked her life to recover clutched tightly against her chest, contained the last letters she'd written to her deceased parents and her drawings of the western landscape, all she had left of her former life in Boston. After her parents died of influenza, she joined her uncle's wagon train heading west to Oregon, seeking a new beginning. Now, it seemed, her journey would end here, frozen and alone in the Wyoming wilderness. As consciousness began to slip away, the soft crunch of snow beneath horse hooves penetrated her fading awareness. Through heavy eyelids, she glimpsed a dark silhouette approaching on horseback. "Miss," a deep voice called out, barely audible over the wind. "Miss, can you hear me?" Rose tried to respond, but her lips were too numb to form words. Strong arms lifted her from the snow, and she was vaguely aware of being placed on a horse, a warm coat enveloping her freezing body. "Not on my watch," the man's voice rumbled close to her ear as he mounted behind her, pulling her securely against his chest. "No one gets left behind in a storm like this, not while I draw breath." The last thing Rose remembered before succumbing to exhaustion was the steady heartbeat of the stranger against her back, and the rhythmic motion of the horse pushing forward through the blizzard. When Rose awoke, she was lying on a bed near a crackling fire. The warmth kissed her skin, a stark contrast to the deadly cold that had nearly claimed her life. She blinked slowly, taking in her surroundings. A small cabin with rough-hewn log walls, simple furniture, and the comforting smell of coffee brewing. "You're awake," came the same deep voice from earlier. Rose turned her head to see a man rising from a chair nearby. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his flannel shirt. His face was weathered but handsome, with a strong jaw partially covered by a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes, a striking blue that reminded her of summer skies, watched her with concern. "Where am I?" Rose managed, her throat painfully dry. He poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and brought it to her lips. "My cabin, about 5 miles east of where I found you. Name's Adam Thornton. I was riding back from checking my trap lines when I spotted something in the snow, Lucky I did another hour out there and—" He didn't finish the sentence. Rose sipped the water gratefully. "Rose Lawson," she replied. "I was traveling with my uncle's wagon train to Oregon. I just stepped away for a moment to retrieve something I dropped, and when I returned, they were gone." Adam's expression darkened. Leaving someone behind in weather like this, that wagon master ought to be strung up. "It was my fault," Rose said weakly. "We were rushing because of the storm, and I didn't tell anyone I was stepping away. By the time I got back to where we'd stopped, they'd already moved on." "Still," Adam said, shaking his head, "they should have taken a head count before continuing." He placed another log on the fire. "That storm's turned into a full blizzard now. We're snowed in for at least a few days, maybe longer. But you're safe here, Miss Lawson, I promise you that." Rose tried to sit up and immediately felt dizzy. Adam was at her side instantly, his hand gently supporting her back. "Easy now," he cautioned. "You've got a touch of frostbite on your fingers and toes, and you're suffering from exhaustion. You need rest." Looking down, Rose noticed her hands were wrapped in clean bandages. "Did you?" "I did what was necessary to treat your frostbite," Adam said, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "I hope you'll forgive the impropriety, but there was no one else to help." Rose nodded, a wave of gratitude washing over her. "You saved my life, Mr. Thornton. I'm in your debt." "Adam," he corrected with a small smile, "and there's no debt. Anyone would have done the same." But Rose knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would ride out in a blizzard to save a stranger. Not everyone would risk their own life to bring her to safety and care for her injuries. "Are you hungry?" Adam asked, moving to the small stove where a pot simmered. "It's just venison stew, but it'll warm you up." "Starving," Rose admitted, suddenly aware of the hollow feeling in her stomach. Adam brought her a bowl of stew and helped her sit up against the pillows. The cabin was simple but neat, with a few books stacked on a small table, a rifle hanging above the door, and various furs and animal skins adorning the walls and floor. "You're a trapper?" Rose asked between spoonfuls of the surprisingly delicious stew. Adam nodded. "Among other things, I guide hunting parties in the summer, trap in winter, and occasionally work cattle drives when money gets tight." He sat down in the chair near her bed. "Been on my own out here for 5 years now." "No family?" Rose asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "No need to apologize," Adam said. "Lost my parents young. Was raised by my grandfather until he passed when I was 17. Been making my own way since then." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? Besides your uncle, do you have family waiting in Oregon?" Rose shook her head. "My parents died of influenza last year. My uncle Edwin is all I have left. He's meeting his business partner in Portland to start a mercantile." She clutched the blanket tightly. He must be frantic with worry by now. "Once the storm passes, I'll get you to Medicine Bow," Adam promised. "The telegraph line there should be working, and you can send a message to the next settlement on the trail. With luck, your uncle will get word that you're safe." "Thank you," Rose said sincerely, finishing her stew. The warm food and fire were making her eyelids heavy again. Adam took the empty bowl. "Get some rest, Miss Lawson. You're safe now." As she drifted back to sleep, Rose felt an unexpected sense of security in this stranger's cabin, miles from anywhere in the midst of a raging blizzard. Perhaps it was the exhaustion or the relief of being alive, but something about Adam Thornton's calm presence soothed her troubled mind. The blizzard continued for 3 days, dumping several feet of snow across the Wyoming territory. Inside the small cabin, Rose slowly regained her strength under Adam's care. By the second day, she was able to move around the cabin, though Adam insisted she remain bundled in blankets near the fire. "Your color's coming back," Adam observed as he served breakfast on the third morning, sourdough biscuits and fried salt pork. And the frostbite on your fingers is healing well. Thanks to your care, Rose said, flexing her fingers. The tips were still tender and slightly discolored, but the pain had subsided significantly. Where did you learn to treat frostbite? My grandfather, Adam replied, sitting across from her at the small wooden table. He was a mountain man before settling here. Taught me everything he knew about surviving the winters. He poured her a cup of coffee. He would have liked you. Why do you say that? Rose asked, surprised. Adam's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. He always said true character shows in adversity. You haven't complained once, despite what you've been through. Rose felt a blush creep into her cheeks at the compliment. I'm alive because of you. What right would I have to complain? They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Over the past days, Rose had come to appreciate Adam's quiet nature. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, his observations were thoughtful and often insightful. In the evenings, they'd shared stories by the fire, Rose telling him about her life in Boston and her dreams of teaching in Oregon. Adam recounting tales of his adventures in the untamed wilderness. Storms finally breaking, Adam said, glancing toward the window where weak sunlight now filtered through the frost-covered glass. If it stays clear, we can try for Medicine Bow tomorrow. Rose nodded, feeling a strange reluctance at the prospect of leaving. How far is it? About 15 miles south, Adam replied. A good day's ride in these conditions, but we can make it before dark if we start early. Rose asked. You don't think I just point you in the right direction and send you on your way, do you? Adam asked with a raised eyebrow. I'll take you to Medicine Bow myself, make sure you're safely settled before I head back. You've already done so much, Rose protested. I couldn't ask you to, you didn't ask, Adam interrupted gently. I'm offering. Besides, the trail will be dangerous after the storm, drifts, hidden ice. It's no journey for someone unfamiliar with the territory. Rose couldn't argue with his logic, though she suspected his concern went beyond practical considerations. Despite his reserved manner, Adam had shown himself to be deeply protective of her welfare. After breakfast, Adam brought in more firewood while Rose washed the dishes. The domesticity of their routine felt surprisingly natural, as if they'd been sharing this space for much longer than a few days. I need to check my trap lines before we leave tomorrow, Adam said, pulling on his heavy coat and gloves. Some will be buried after this storm, but I should salvage what I can. Will you be all right alone for a few hours? Of course, Rose assured him. Please don't worry about me. Adam hesitated at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There's a rifle above the door if you need it. I've never had trouble with wolves this close to the cabin, but after a big snow, they sometimes get desperate. Rose nodded, trying to hide her nervousness at the thought. I'll be fine. Be careful out there. After Adam left, the cabin seemed unnervingly quiet. Rose busied herself with mending a tear in her dress using the needle and thread from Adam's sparse but practical household supplies. As she worked, she found herself wondering what would happen after they reached Medicine Bow. Would she simply thank Adam for his kindness and continue on her journey, never to see him again? The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. In just 3 days, this quiet, steadfast man had become important to her in a way she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just gratitude for saving her life, though that was certainly part of it. There was something else, a connection that had formed between them during these snow-bound days. Rose was so lost in thought that the sudden howl from somewhere in the forest made her jump, pricking her finger with the needle. She moved to the window, wiping away the frost to peer outside. The snow had stopped completely now, and the late afternoon sun cast long blue shadows across the pristine white landscape surrounding the cabin. In the distance, she could see Adam approaching, dragging a small sled loaded with his traps and a few animal pelts. Relief washed over her at the sight of him, and Rose realized with startling clarity that she wasn't ready to say goodbye to Adam Thornton. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. She'd known him less than a week. What did she really know about him, or this feeling growing inside her? When Adam entered the cabin, stomping snow from his boots, Rose had composed herself enough to greet him normally, though her heart beat a little faster when he smiled at her. "Managed to save most of the traps," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "Got a couple of rabbits, too. Should make a good supper before our journey tomorrow." That night, as they ate rabbit stew by the firelight, a comfortable silence settled between them. Rose found herself memorizing the details of Adam's face, the way the firelight played across his features, how his eyes reflected the flames when he looked up to catch her watching him. "Something wrong?" he asked. Rose shook her head. "Just thinking about tomorrow. About reaching Medicine Bow and what comes after." Adam set his bowl aside. "You're worried about catching up with your uncle's wagon train." "Yes," Rose said, though that wasn't entirely what had been on her mind. "Do you think there's a chance I could still join them?" "Depends on how long they waited in Medicine Bow," Adam replied thoughtfully. "If they stayed to search for you, you might find them still there. If not, we can send telegrams ahead to the next few stops on the Oregon Trail. Either way, I'll make sure you're not stranded." "You've already done more than enough," Rose said softly. Adam's eyes held hers for a long moment. "It's no trouble, Rose." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Besides," he continued, breaking the moment with a slight smile, "I need supplies from town anyway. You're just giving me a good reason to make the trip." Later, as Rose lay in Adam's bed, he had insisted on sleeping on a bedroll by the fire since the first night. She found herself wondering what kind of life Adam led here, alone in his cabin through the long Wyoming winters. Did he ever get lonely? Did he ever wish for companionship? And why did these questions suddenly seem so important to her? Morning came with clear skies and brilliant sunshine that made the snow-covered landscape sparkle like diamonds. Adam had risen before dawn to prepare for their journey, packing supplies and readying his horse. "We'll ride double," he explained as Rose emerged from the cabin, dressed in her now clean traveling clothes with Adam's spare coat over top for additional warmth. "Diablo's strong enough to carry us both to town." Diablo, a large black gelding with intelligent eyes, snorted as if in agreement. Adam helped Rose mount first, then swung up behind her just as he had on the night he rescued her. "Ready?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Rose nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were, his chest solid against her back, his arms around her as he took up the reins. "Ready." The journey to Medicine Bow was slow but steady. Adam was careful to avoid the deepest drifts, sometimes dismounting to lead Diablo through particularly treacherous stretches. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horse and eat some of the provisions. Adam had packed jerky, hard biscuits, and dried apples. As they sat on a fallen log Adam had cleared of snow, Rose found herself searching for words to express what she was feeling, but everything that came to mind seemed inadequate. "Adam," she began hesitantly, "I want you to know how grateful I am, not just for saving my life, but for your kindness these past few days." Adam looked at her, squinting slightly in the winter sunlight. "You don't owe me any thanks, Rose." "But I do," she insisted. "You could have left me at your cabin today, pointed me toward town, but instead you're taking me yourself, making sure I'm safe." "It's what anyone would do," he said, though they both knew that wasn't true. It's what you did, Rose corrected softly, and I won't forget it. Something flickered in Adam's eyes, something that made Rose's heart beat faster, but before he could respond, a distant wolf howl broke the moment. We should keep moving, Adam said, rising and offering his hand to help her up. Still a few hours to town, and I'd like to arrive before dark. The rest of the journey passed in companionable silence, broken only by Adam occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her of rough terrain ahead. As the afternoon waned, Rose began to see signs of civilization: fences, the occasional distant farmhouse, and finally, smoke rising from chimneys on the horizon. Medicine Bow, Adam announced as they crested a small hill. Below them lay a frontier town nestled in the valley, its buildings dusted with snow, tendrils of smoke rising into the clear winter sky. Rose felt a mix of emotions at the sight: relief at reaching civilization, anticipation of possibly reconnecting with her uncle's wagon train, and an unexpected sadness that her time alone with Adam was coming to an end. They rode into town as the sun began to set, the main street bustling despite the recent blizzard. Men shoveled paths between buildings, children threw snowballs in the cleared areas, and horses stamped impatiently at hitching posts. After days in the isolated cabin, the activity seemed almost overwhelming to Rose. Adam guided Diablo toward a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Medicine Bow Hotel and Restaurant. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Rose down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment after her feet touched the ground, he didn't let go, and Rose found herself looking up into his eyes, searching for some sign that he felt the same reluctance to part that she did. "Let's get you inside," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual. "You must be exhausted." The hotel lobby was warm and relatively crowded, with travelers stranded by the blizzard filling every available chair. A harried-looking clerk looked up as they approached the desk. "Need a room?" he asked, barely glancing at them. "Only got one left, and it's small." "We need 2 rooms," Adam replied. "And information. A wagon train passed through here before the storm, would have been headed to Oregon." The clerk's expression changed. "You mean Bailey's train? They left yesterday morning, soon as the snow let up enough to move. Waited 2 days here searching for a missing passenger." He looked at Rose more carefully. "That wouldn't be you, miss, would it?" Rose nodded, a mixture of disappointment and relief washing over her. "Yes, I'm Rose Lawson. My uncle, Edwin Lawson, was with them." "Well, I'll be," the clerk exclaimed. "They had search parties out until the storm got too bad. Your uncle was beside himself, left a letter for you in case you turned up." He rummaged beneath the counter and produced an envelope. "Said they had to keep moving or risk getting snowed in for weeks, but he left instructions for you to follow when possible." Rose accepted the letter with trembling fingers, tears welling in her eyes. Adam placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "About those rooms," he prompted the clerk. "Oh, right. Like I said, only got one left. Storms had folks stranded here for days." Adam looked at Rose questioningly. She swallowed hard, suddenly faced with a decision she hadn't anticipated. "I can try the saloon," Adam offered. "They sometimes rent rooms upstairs." "No need," came a female voice from behind them. They turned to see a plump, middle-aged woman in a practical wool dress approaching. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Martha Simmons. I own the dress shop across the street. Got plenty of room at my place if the young lady needs somewhere to stay until she can catch up with her people." Rose glanced at Adam, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Simmons," she said gratefully. "Thought that might be the case when I saw you ride in," Martha said with a knowing smile. Town this size, everyone notices newcomers. Why don't you come with me, dear? We can get you settled in, and I've got stew on the stove." Rose turned to Adam, suddenly uncertain. "What about you?" "I'll take the room here," he said. "Need to see about supplies tomorrow anyway before heading back." There was something in his expression that Rose couldn't quite read, a restraint that hadn't been there in the isolation of his cabin. "Well then," Martha said briskly, "why doesn't your gentleman friend join us for supper before you part ways? No sense eating alone when there's plenty to go around." Before either could protest the assumption in her words, Martha was already heading for the door, clearly expecting them to follow. Later, seated at Martha Simmons's dining table with bowls of hearty beef stew before them, Rose finally opened her uncle's letter. The older woman had tactfully excused herself to her sewing room after serving the meal, leaving Rose and Adam alone. "He writes that they waited as long as they dared," Rose said, scanning the pages. "The wagon master insisted they move on before another storm trapped them completely. Uncle Edwin wanted to stay behind himself, but he has rheumatism so badly that Mrs. Bailey convinced him he'd be of more use continuing to Oregon and sending help back." She looked up at Adam. "He's arranged for me to travel with the next eastbound stagecoach to Fort Laramie, where I can join another wagon train heading west in the spring." "When's the next stage due through?" Adam asked, setting down his spoon. According to his letter, weather permitting, there should be one within a week. Rose folded the letter carefully. "He's left money with the bank here for my expenses until then." Adam nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's good. You'll be taken care of then." An awkward silence fell between them, so different from the comfortable quiet they'd shared at his cabin. "What will you do?" Rose asked finally. "After you get your supplies tomorrow, head back, I suppose," Adam replied. "Got traps to check, firewood to chop." "Winter's just beginning." Rose nodded, fighting back an unexpected wave of emotion. "Of course." Adam studied her face for a long moment. "Rose, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "I'm glad things have worked out for you, that you'll be able to rejoin your uncle come spring." "Yes," Rose agreed, though her heart wasn't in it. "It's fortunate." Another silence, heavier than before. "I should go," Adam said finally, rising from his chair. "It's getting late and you must be tired." Rose stood as well, panic rising in her chest at the finality in his tone. "Will I see you before you leave town?" Adam hesitated, then nodded. "I'll come by in the morning to make sure you're settled with everything you need." He reached for his hat, and Rose impulsively caught his hand. "Adam," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for everything." His fingers tightened around hers for a brief moment before he gently disengaged. "Good night, Rose," he said softly. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a quiet click that sounded to Rose like the ending of something precious before it had truly begun. Martha returned to the dining room moments later, taking in Rose's expression with a knowing look. "Men," she said, shaking her head. "Sometimes they need a little help seeing what's right in front of them." Rose blushed. "It's not we're not, honey," Martha interrupted kindly. "I've been around long enough to recognize when two people have feelings for each other. The way that man looks at you when you're not watching. Well, let's just say I've seen less devotion in couples married 20 years. He saved my life," Rose explained. "That's all it is, gratitude on my part and responsibility on his." Martha's skeptical expression made it clear she wasn't convinced. "If you say so, dear. Now let me show you where you'll be sleeping. You've had quite a journey." That night, in the small but comfortable guest room of Martha's home above her dress shop, Rose lay awake, listening to the occasional sounds from the street below, a drunk's laughter, the distant piano from the saloon, the creak of wagon wheels in the snow. so different from the profound silence of Adam's cabin, broken only by the crackling fire and the wind in the pines. She thought about the week ahead, waiting for a stagecoach to take her away from Medicine Bow, away from Wyoming, away from Adam. It was the sensible thing to do. She barely knew him. She had plans, a future waiting in Oregon with her only remaining family. And yet, Rose remembered the feeling of Adam's arms around her as they rode, the quiet conversations by firelight, the look in his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching. In just a few days, he had become important to her in a way no one ever had before. The thought of never seeing him again after tomorrow made her chest ache with a physical pain. "This is foolishness," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "Schoolgirl romanticism." But even as she tried to dismiss her feelings, Rose knew they were real. The question was, were they returned? And if they were, what then? Morning brought no clarity, only a strengthened resolve to at least speak honestly with Adam before he left. If nothing else, she would not let him ride away without knowing how deeply he had affected her. After breakfast with Martha, Rose helped with the dishes, her mind racing with what she might say when Adam arrived. The older woman seemed to sense her preoccupation and kept conversation light, sharing gossip about the town and its inhabitants to fill the silence. "That'll be him," Martha said when a knock came at the front door just after 9. "Right on time, too. Another point in his favor." Rose smoothed her hair nervously and adjusted her borrowed shawl. Martha had insisted on lending her a few items from the shop until her own things could be properly cleaned and mended. Adam stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking as if he'd had as restless a night as Rose. There were shadows beneath his eyes, but he'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His hair was neatly combed, his shirt clean, his beard trimmed. "Morning," he said, his deep voice sending a now familiar flutter through Rose's stomach. "Hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," Rose replied, suddenly shy. "Would you like to come in?" Adam glanced past her to where Martha was making a show of being busy with her sewing. "Actually, I was hoping you might join me for a walk. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you." Rose's heart leapt. "Of course. Let me just get my coat." Martha winked at her as she helped Rose into the heavy wool coat. "Take your time, dear. I've got inventory to do all morning." The streets of Medicine Bow were busy with morning activity, merchants clearing the last of the snow from their storefronts, wagons delivering goods, townspeople going about their business. Adam and Rose walked side by side, not touching but close enough that their arms occasionally brushed, sending sparks of awareness through Rose each time. They made their way to the edge of town, where a small church stood on a rise overlooking the valley. Adam led her to a bench someone had cleared of snow, and they sat in silence for a moment, looking out over the town and the vast, white blanketed landscape beyond. "I've been thinking," Adam said finally, his voice low and serious. "About you. About what happens next." Rose's breath caught. "So have I." Adam turned to her, his blue eyes intense. "Rose, I know we've only known each other a short time, and I have no right to ask this of you, but—" He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I don't want you to leave." The simple, direct words made Rose's heart soar. "Adam, please, let me finish," he said quickly. "I need to say this while I have the courage. I've been alone a long time, and I was content with that life. But these past few days with you, having you in my cabin, talking by the fire, even just sharing meals." He shook his head as if amazed by his own feelings. "The thought of going back to that solitude now is unbearable." Rose reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "For me too," she admitted softly, hope flared in Adam's eyes. "What about your uncle, your plans for Oregon?" "I care for my uncle, but we're not close," Rose explained. He took me in out of obligation after my parents died. The plan was always for me to find my own way once we reached Oregon, teaching perhaps, or working in his store. She squeezed his hand. But none of that seems to matter now. Not when I think of leaving here, leaving you. Adam's expression softened. I don't have much to offer, Rose. My cabin is small, the winters are harsh, and trapping isn't steady income. But I promise you this. I would devote myself to your happiness every day for the rest of our lives. Tears sprang to Rose's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. Adam Thornton, are you asking me to marry you? A smile spread across his face, transforming his features. I suppose I am, though I hadn't planned to be quite so direct about it. He shifted on the bench to face her fully. Rose Lawson, I know it's sudden and maybe even foolish, but I've fallen in love with you. Would you consider becoming my wife? Rose didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, joy bubbling up inside her. Yes, I will marry you. Adam's smile widened, and he leaned forward to press his lips gently to hers. The kiss was tender, almost reverent, but filled with promise that took Rose's breath away. When they parted, Adam rested his forehead against hers. Are you sure? He asked. It won't be an easy life. I'm sure, Rose replied without hesitation. These past days have shown me that home isn't a place, it's where you feel safe, where you belong. And somehow, against all odds, I feel that with you. Adam kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms drawing her close against the winter chill. When they finally separated, both breathless, he grinned. Martha Simmons is watching us from her shop window. Rose laughed, glancing back toward town to see the older woman indeed peering out at them, making no attempt to hide her interest. She told me last night that you needed help seeing what was right in front of you. Smart woman, Adam chuckled, though I'd say we both needed a little help. They walked back to town hand in hand, stopping first at the telegraph office, where Rose sent a message to her uncle explaining her decision to remain in Wyoming. Though she felt a pang of guilt at abandoning their plans, she knew in her heart that Edwin would understand, perhaps even be relieved not to have the responsibility of her future weighing on him. Next, they visited the small church they'd sat beside earlier, finding the minister at home in the adjacent parsonage. Reverend Davis listened to their story with evident amusement and agreed to marry them the following Sunday, provided they attended his services between now and then so he could get to know them properly. I don't want to wait, Adam admitted as they left the church, but I suppose a few days will give us time to prepare, and I should fix up the cabin a bit before bringing you home as my wife. Home. The word filled Rose with warmth despite the winter chill. I don't need anything fancy, Adam. Just you, he smiled, pulling her close for a quick kiss. Nevertheless, a proper bed would be nice. I've been sleeping on the floor for days. The days leading up to their wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Martha insisted on making Rose a wedding dress, refusing payment and declaring it her wedding gift. Adam purchased supplies for their return journey to the cabin, including fabric for curtains and a new quilt, despite Rose's protests that such luxuries could wait. My wife will have a proper home, he said firmly, and the pride with which he spoke the word wife made Rose fall a little more in love with him each time. They spent their days together exploring the town, making plans for their future, and their evenings in conversation with Martha or attending social gatherings at the church, where the news of their whirlwind romance had spread, making them something of a local sensation. Left behind in a blizzard, rescued by a handsome trapper, and now a wedding, Martha's friend Beatrice declared at one such gathering. It's like something from a dime novel. Rose blushed, but Adam merely smiled and drew her closer to his side, seemingly content to let the townspeople enjoy their story. In quiet moments alone, they learned more about each other, Adam's dreams of eventually building a larger home and perhaps raising horses instead of relying solely on trapping, Rose's love of teaching, and her skill with medicinal herbs learned from her mother. "The nearest school is in Laramie," Adam told her one evening as they walked back to Martha's after dinner at the hotel. "But there are families scattered throughout the area with children who get little education. You could teach them if you wanted." The thoughtfulness of his suggestion, his concern for her happiness, made Rose's heart swell with affection. "I'd like that," she said. "And in the meantime, I can learn more about this country, about trapping and surviving the winters. You're sure about this?" Adam asked, stopping to look into her eyes, his expression serious in the moonlight. "About marrying me, living so far from town, from civilization." Rose reached up to touch his face, the beard soft beneath her fingers. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Sunday dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow that fell overnight making the world seem new and untouched. Rose stood in Martha's guest room, hardly recognizing the woman in the looking glass as herself. The wedding dress Martha had created was simple but beautiful ivory wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, fitted perfectly to Rose's slender figure. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said, adjusting the wreath of winter greenery and dried flowers she'd arranged in Rose's dark hair. "That man of yours won't know what hit him," Rose smiled, nervous excitement fluttering in her stomach. "I can hardly believe this is happening. A week ago I was lost in a blizzard, certain I would die." Martha patted her shoulder. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. The smart ones recognize a blessing when it comes their way and grab hold with both hands." She stepped back to admire her handiwork. "There. Perfect. Now let's not keep that handsome trapper of yours waiting any longer." The church was filled with townsfolk, many of whom Rose had met only in the past week, but who had embraced the romance of their story and come to wish them well. Adam stood at the altar, wearing a new shirt and vest, his face freshly shaved except for his neatly trimmed mustache. When he turned and saw Rose walking toward him, the naked adoration in his expression removed any last doubt from her mind. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, Reverend Davis speaking eloquently about the providence that had brought them together and the strength of a love that had blossomed so quickly yet so deeply. When Adam placed a simple gold band on Rose's finger purchased, she later learned, with the proceeds from his entire winter's trapping thus far, his hands trembled slightly, betraying his emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "You may kiss your bride." Adam's kiss was tender but passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The cheers and applause of the congregation seemed distant to Rose, her entire world narrowed to this moment, this man who was now her husband. The celebration afterward at the hotel was joyous, with food and music provided by the townsfolk who had taken the newlyweds into their hearts. Rose danced with Adam, both of them somewhat awkward but laughing too much to care, and later with several of the older men in town while Adam looked on with a smile that never left his face. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes, thanking Martha especially for her kindness and friendship. The older woman embraced Rose tightly. "You come visit whenever you can," she insisted. "And remember what I said about that spare room upstairs. It's yours whenever you need to stay in town." Adam had arranged for them to spend their wedding night at the hotel, before departing for the cabin in the morning. As he carried Rose across the threshold of their room insisting on observing the tradition, despite her laughing protests, the reality of their marriage finally seemed to settle over them both. Alone for the first time as husband and wife, They stood looking at each other, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had already shared in conversation and emotion over the past week. "Mrs. Thornton," Adam said softly, testing the name on his tongue. Rose smiled, stepping closer to him. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "More than I can say." Their kiss began gently but quickly deepened, a week of restrained desire finally finding expression. Adam's hands trembled as he helped Rose with the buttons of her dress, his reverence for her body making her feel both cherished and desired. Their lovemaking was tender yet passionate, the culmination of a connection that had begun the moment he lifted her from the snow and whispered, "Not on my watch," against the howling blizzard. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Rose felt a contentment she had never known before. This man, this kind, strong, gentle man, was her husband. The thought still seemed miraculous. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, his fingers trailing lazily through her hair. "That I'm the luckiest woman in Wyoming territory," Rose replied honestly. "Maybe in the whole country." Adam chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "Funny, I was just thinking the same about myself being the luckiest man, that is." Rose propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Do you think we're crazy? Getting married after knowing each other only a week?" "Probably," Adam admitted with a grin. "But I knew the moment I brought you into my cabin, watching you sleep by the fire, fighting to survive. There was something special about you, Rose Lawson," he corrected himself. "Rose Thornton." Rose smiled at the name, leaning down to kiss him softly. "I think I knew too, though I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude." "And now?" Adam asked, his eyes searching hers. "Now I know it's love," she said simply. "The kind that lasts a lifetime." The journey back to Adam's cabin the next day was vastly different from Rose's first trip there, unconscious and near death. Now, she rode behind her husband, arms wrapped securely around his waist, watching the winter landscape with appreciation rather than fear. Adam pointed out landmarks, naming creeks and hills, teaching her to navigate the territory that was now her home. They stopped for lunch in a sheltered grove of pines, where Adam built a small fire to warm them and heat coffee. Sitting side by side on a fallen log, they shared bread and jerky, their shoulders touching, occasionally exchanging glances and smiles that needed no words. "We should reach the cabin before dark," Adam said as they prepared to continue their journey. "Weather's holding, but I don't like to take chances." Rose nodded, understanding now the respect for nature's power that living in this wild country required. The blizzard that had nearly claimed her life had taught her that lesson well. As they rode, Rose found herself thinking about the future stretching before them, winters spent in the cozy cabin, springs bringing new life to the forest, summers exploring the mountains Adam had described so vividly. There would be challenges, she knew. Life in the wilderness was never easy. But facing those challenges with Adam by her side seemed not just possible, but exciting. Late afternoon sun was slanting through the trees when Adam pointed ahead. "There it is." Rose followed his gesture and saw the cabin, smoke rising from its chimney. "You left the fire burning." "Banked it well before we left," Adam explained. "But I asked Joe Miller Trapper, who lives about 5 miles west, to check on it yesterday, make sure everything was ready for our return." The thought that Adam had arranged such details, ensuring their homecoming would be warm and welcoming, touched Rose deeply. As they approached the cabin, she noticed changes: a new bench beside the door, fresh cut firewood stacked neatly against the wall, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. Adam dismounted first, then lifted Rose down, holding her a moment longer than necessary, his eyes warm on hers. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton." Rose smiled, happiness bubbling up inside her. "It's good to be home." Adam insisted on carrying her across this threshold as well, making Rose laugh as he struggled slightly with the door while holding her. Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting, the fire crackling in the hearth, and Rose noticed other changes: a larger bed in place of the narrow one she'd occupied during her recovery. New curtains at the windows, Martha's doing, she suspected, and a small table set with 2 place settings and a vase containing pine branches and dried berries. Joe's wife Sarah helped with some of this, Adam admitted, setting Rose on her feet. Said no bride should come home to a bachelor's mess. "It's perfect," Rose said sincerely, turning slowly to take it all in. The cabin that had seemed rustic but functional during her recovery now felt like a home, their home. While Adam tended to Diablo in the small lean-to stable attached to the cabin, Rose unpacked their supplies, arranging her few belongings alongside Adam's with a sense of rightness that defied their brief acquaintance. By the time he returned, stamping snow from his boots, she had soup warming on the stove and fresh coffee brewing. "Something smells good," Adam said, hanging his coat by the door. "Martha insisted on sending food for our first few days," Rose explained. "Said she didn't want me worrying about cooking when we first got home." She blushed slightly at the implication. Adam's slow smile made her heart beat faster. Smart woman, that Martha. That evening, they shared their first meal as husband and wife in their own home, sitting close together at the small table, talking about their plans for the cabin, for the spring, for their life together. After dinner, Adam showed Rose a small trunk he'd kept stored beneath the bed. "These were my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal neatly folded linens, a few pieces of simple jewelry, and a well-worn Bible. "I thought you might like to have them." Touched by the gesture, Rose carefully examined each item, recognizing the value they held for Adam. "They're beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you for sharing them with me." "She would have liked you," Adam said, a hint of sadness in his voice. "Strong, kind, not afraid of hard work or wilderness." Rose leaned against him, offering silent comfort for the family he had lost long ago. "Tell me about her. About your father and grandfather, too." They spent the evening by the fire, Adam sharing stories of his childhood, Rose reciprocating with tales of her own family and upbringing in Boston. Each revelation, each memory shared, wove another thread in the tapestry of their relationship, strengthening bonds that had formed so rapidly yet felt as solid as if they'd known each other for years. When they finally retired to bed, their lovemaking was both familiar and new, their growing knowledge of each other's bodies and desires making their connection even more profound than the previous night. Afterward, Rose lay in Adam's arms, listening to the wind outside and the occasional pop of the dying fire, feeling utterly content. "I never thought I could be this happy," Adam murmured against her hair. "Never thought I'd find someone willing to share this life with me." Rose pressed a kiss to his chest. "I never thought I'd find somewhere I truly belonged, someone who makes me feel so completely at home." In the weeks that followed, Rose and Adam settled into the rhythm of life together in the wilderness. Adam taught Rose the skills she would need to survive: how to identify animal tracks, how to shoot the rifle he kept over the door, how to predict weather changes by watching the sky and wildlife. Rose, in turn, brought her own knowledge and talents, establishing a small herb garden in pots by the window, organizing the cabin more efficiently, and adding touches that made the space increasingly comfortable. Winter deepened around them, bringing storms that kept them housebound for days at a time, but neither minded the isolation. They found joy in simple routines, Adam chopping wood while Rose prepared meals. Evenings spent reading aloud from Adam's small collection of books. Nights wrapped in each other's arms as the wind howled outside. In February, during a break in the weather, they made the journey to Medicine Bow for supplies and to visit Martha, who welcomed them with open arms and insisted they stay for dinner. The older woman took Rose aside while Adam discussed business with the general store owner. "Marriage agrees with you," Martha observed, noting Rose's glowing complexion and bright eyes. "That cabin in the woods doesn't seem so isolated now, does it?" Rose smiled. "Not at all. It's the most peaceful place I've ever lived." "And that husband of yours, still treating you well?" "Better than well," Rose assured her. "Adam is." She paused, searching for words adequate to describe the man who had become her world. "He's everything I never knew I needed." Martha nodded, satisfied. "I thought as much when I saw you ride in together." Some things are just meant to be, no matter how unlikely they seem. As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, signs of spring appeared. The days lengthened, birds returned to the forest around their cabin, and the snow started to melt, revealing patches of earth that Rose eyed eagerly for a proper garden. One evening in late March, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Adam took Rose's hand, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, "about what kind of life I want to give you." Rose squeezed his fingers. "I'm happy with our life as it is, Adam." "I know," he acknowledged with a smile, "and that means more to me than I can say, but I've been saving for years with no real purpose in mind. Now I have one." He reached into his pocket and unfolded a rough sketch on a piece of paper. "What do you think of this?" Rose examined the drawing: a larger cabin, with separate rooms, windows that would catch the morning sun, and a wide porch. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "But Adam, you don't need to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. "I want to build a proper home for us, for our future." His eyes held hers meaningfully. "For the family we might have someday." The implication made Rose's breath catch. They hadn't specifically discussed children, though the possibility had lingered in the background of their plans. "You want children?" Adam's expression softened. "More than I realized until I met you. The thought of a little girl with your eyes, or a boy we could teach to appreciate this land." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "But only if you want that too." Rose's heart swelled with love for this man who continually surprised her with his thoughtfulness. "I do want that," she assured him. "Very much." The kiss they shared was tender with promise, a pledge of the future they would build together. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing with it new projects and plans. Adam began cutting timber for their new cabin, selecting a site a quarter-mile from their current home, on a gentle rise with views of the mountains and protection from the prevailing winds. Rose planted a garden, using seeds Martha had given her and knowledge from books Adam had acquired on his last trip to Laramie. In April, they received a letter from Rose's uncle Edwin, who had reached Oregon safely and established his mercantile business. Though his initial message after receiving Rose's telegram had been brief and somewhat cool, this longer letter expressed genuine happiness for her marriage and invited them to visit when circumstances permitted. Rose wrote back immediately, sharing news of their life and plans, feeling a weight lift at the reconciliation with her only remaining family. As spring blossomed into summer, their new cabin took shape, Adam working on it whenever he wasn't hunting or fishing to keep their larder full, occasionally assisted by Joe Miller or other trappers passing through the area. Rose divided her time between tending her thriving garden, preserving food for the coming winter, and helping with the construction whenever Adam would allow it. In July, their first anniversary of meeting only months away, Rose confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting a child. When she told Adam, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for, his joy and tenderness bringing tears to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Due sometime in February, I think," Rose said, covering his hand with her own. "We should be settled in the new cabin by then." Adam nodded, determination hardening his features. "We will be. I promise you that." He redoubled his efforts on the construction, enlisting more help from neighboring homesteaders and trappers, trading hunting and guiding services for labor. By September, the outer structure was complete, the roof in place just as the first autumn rains began. Rose's pregnancy progressed well, her body growing stronger rather than weaker with the new life inside her. Martha visited from Medicine Bow, bringing baby clothes she had sewn and practical advice for the birth and early motherhood. Adam hovered protectively, constantly finding excuses to touch Rose, to feel the growing swell of her belly, his wonder never diminishing as their child grew. In November, they moved into their new home, though some interior work remained to be completed. The cabin was everything Adam had promised: spacious, warm, with large windows that filled the rooms with light during the day. He had built furniture for each room, including a cradle that sat ready in the corner of their bedroom, lovingly carved with pine trees and mountains. Winter returned to the Wyoming territory, but this year Rose welcomed it, secure in their well-stocked, comfortable home, with the man she loved by her side and the promise of new life to brighten the darkest days. February brought heavy snow and bitter cold, but inside the Thornton cabin, warmth and anticipation filled the air. Rose's time was near, and Adam rarely left her side, completing only essential chores before hurrying back to check on her. On a clear, cold night with stars brilliant in the black sky, Rose went into labor. Adam had arranged for Sarah Miller to assist with the birth, but when he rode to fetch her, Joe informed him that his wife had gone to help another woman in labor 10 miles in the opposite direction. Returning to Rose with this news, Adam found her calm despite the increasing pain of her contractions. "We'll manage," she assured him, gripping his hand tightly as another pain washed over her. "I've helped deliver babies before with my mother. I know what to do. I just need you with me." Through the long night, Adam remained steadfast, following Rose's instructions, offering comfort and encouragement as she labored to bring their child into the world. As dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, a lusty cry filled the cabin. Their son had arrived, healthy and strong with a shock of dark hair like his father's. "He's perfect," Adam whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he cradled the tiny bundle. "Just like his mother." Rose smiled tiredly, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world, Benjamin Edwin Thornton." The name honoring both Adam's grandfather and Rose's uncle had been agreed upon months earlier. Looking at his son's face, Adam felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. This was his family, his legacy, the future he had never dared hope for before Rose came into his life. As Benjamin grew from infant to toddler, the Thornton family flourished. Adam expanded their property, adding a small stable for the horses he had begun to raise and train. Rose's garden produced abundantly, and she began to make a name for herself among the scattered homesteads as a healer, using her knowledge of medicinal herbs to treat common ailments. True to her dream, Rose also began teaching the children from neighboring homesteads, gathering them at the cabin 3 days a week for lessons in reading, writing, arithmetic, and natural history. Adam built a lean-to classroom adjacent to the main cabin. With small desks and a blackboard, Rose had ordered from Laramie. In the spring following Benjamin's second birthday, Rose gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Martha, after both their mothers. Maggie, as they called her, had Rose's dark eyes and curious nature, watching the world with an alertness that delighted her parents. 4 years after that snowy night when Adam found Rose half frozen in the wilderness, the Thorntons hosted a Christmas gathering for their neighbors the Millers, the Petersons from the valley to the east, and Martha Simmons, who made the journey from Medicine Bow despite the winter roads. As Adam stood in their home, watching Rose laugh with Martha while Benjamin showed off his reading skills and baby Maggie slept peacefully in her cradle, he was struck by how completely his life had transformed. The solitary trapper who had been content with his own company had become a husband, a father, a respected member of their small community, all because he had happened to spot something unusual in the snow on his way home one winter evening. Later that night, with their guests gone and the children asleep, Adam and Rose stood on their porch, gazing at the star-filled sky above the snow-covered landscape. He wrapped his arm around her waist, drawing her close against the cold. "Happy?" he asked softly. Rose leaned her head against his shoulder. "More than I ever dreamed possible." Adam pressed a kiss to her temple, thinking of the frightened, half-frozen young woman he had found in the snow and the strong, confident wife and mother she had become. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I think about that day sometimes, how easily I might have taken a different route home, or how the snow might have covered you completely before I passed by. But you didn't, and it didn't," Rose said simply, turning in his arms to face him. "You found me, Adam Thornton. You said not on my watch, and you saved my life." She reached up to touch his face, her eyes filled with love. "And every day since then, you've made that life worth living." As their lips met in a kiss that still held all the passion and tenderness of their first, snow began to fall gently around them, not the threatening blizzard that had nearly separated them forever, but a peaceful blanket covering the land they both had come to love together. In the years that followed, the Thornton family continued to thrive. Adam's horse breeding business grew steadily, earning a reputation for quality stock throughout the territory. Rose's small school expanded to include children from as far as 15 miles away, some staying with the Thorntons during the week when weather made daily travel impossible. Benjamin, growing into a thoughtful young man with his father's strength and his mother's compassion, showed a natural affinity for horses and the land. Little Maggie, with her quick mind and adventurous spirit, delighted in helping Rose with her healing work, learning the properties of plants and how to prepare remedies. In 1875, Rose received news that her Uncle Edwin had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Though saddened, she found comfort in the correspondence they had maintained over the years and the reconciliation they had achieved. Edwin had left his mercantile business to a longtime employee, but had willed a substantial sum to Rose and her children, enough to expand their home again and establish trust funds for Benjamin and Maggie's education. That same year brought another blessing: the birth of their third child, a son they named William Joseph, after Adam's father and their good friend Joe Miller. Willie, as they called him, was a quiet baby with observant eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. As their family grew, so did the community around them. What had once been isolated homesteads scattered across the wilderness gradually became a small settlement. When the railroad expanded its route, bringing a station within 10 miles of their home, Adam saw an opportunity to establish a more formal enterprise, breeding and training horses specifically for the railroad, and the increasing number of settlers arriving in the territory. By 1880, the Thornton Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the region. The original cabin, where Adam had brought Rose that fateful night, still stood a short distance from their expanded home, preserved as a reminder of their beginnings. Rose sometimes took the children there, telling them the story of how their parents met, of blizzards and rescue, of love that had bloomed in the most unlikely circumstances. On the evening of their 12th wedding anniversary, Adam and Rose walked hand in hand to the old cabin, just the two of them, while 14-year-old Benjamin watched over his younger siblings at the main house. Inside, Adam had prepared a surprise: the small table set for dinner with their best dishes, candles providing golden light, and a fire warming the space that held so many memories. "It looks just like I remember," Rose said softly, running her hand along the simple furniture Adam had crafted so many years before. "Smaller, perhaps, but otherwise unchanged." "Not entirely unchanged," Adam replied with a smile, pointing to the new quilt on the bed and the curtains at the windows, recreations of the ones Martha had given them when they were first married. Rose turned to her husband, taking in the sight of him in the flickering candlelight. At 41, Adam was still as handsome as the day she'd first seen him, perhaps more so. The years had added silver at his temples and a few lines around his eyes, but his powerful build and the warmth in his gaze remained unchanged. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, drawing her into his arms. "That I'm still the luckiest woman in Wyoming," Rose replied, echoing words she had spoken on their wedding night. "That I thank God every day for the blizzard that brought us together." Adam's laugh was rich and deep. "Most people curse blizzards rather than thank God for them. Most people weren't rescued by a handsome trapper who declared 'not on my watch' and changed their life forever," Rose countered, rising on tiptoes to press a kiss to his lips. The kiss deepened quickly, years of marriage having done nothing to diminish their desire for each other. When they finally parted, both breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Rose Thornton," he said softly. "More today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting with the truth of those simple words, "now and always." As they shared a private anniversary dinner in the cabin where their journey had begun, Rose reflected on the incredible path her life had taken. The wagon train that had left her behind, the near-death experience in the snow, the chance rescue by a solitary trapper, all events that had seemed like disasters at the time, but had led her precisely where she was meant to be. Outside, snow began to fall, just as it had on that fateful night, but inside the cabin, warmth and love kept the cold at bay, as they had for 12 wonderful years, and would for many more to come. By the time their 20th wedding anniversary arrived in 1888, the Thorntons had witnessed remarkable changes in their corner of Wyoming. The territory was moving toward statehood. The settlement near their ranch had grown into a proper town with a school, where Rose still taught part-time, and the railroad had brought unprecedented connection to the wider world. Benjamin, at 20, had returned from 2 years at the university in Denver with new ideas for expanding the family business. Maggie, 17 and as bright as her mother, was preparing to follow her brother to university, determined to study medicine despite the challenges facing women in the field. Willie, at 13, showed a talent for writing that had earned him publication in the territorial newspaper. As Rose watched her family gathered around the large dining table for their anniversary celebration, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Adam caught her eye from the head of the table and winked, still able to make her heart skip a beat after all these years. Later that night, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Adam took Rose's hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band he had placed on her finger 20 years earlier. "Do you ever wonder," he asked quietly, "what might have happened if I hadn't found you that night?" Rose squeezed his hand. "Sometimes. But then I look at our children, at everything we've built together, and I know that we were meant to find each other." She rested her head against his shoulder. "Some things are simply destined to be." Adam nodded, wrapping his arm around her. "Do you remember what I said when I found you in the snow?" Rose smiled at the memory. "Not on my watch," she quoted. "I was barely conscious, but I remember the determination in your voice, the way you held me as we rode through the storm." "Best decision I ever made," Adam said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Riding back for a stranger in a blizzard." "Best decision I ever made was saying yes to a handsome trapper who proposed after knowing me less than a week," Rose countered with a laugh. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the Wyoming night surrounding them: crickets, the occasional distant howl of a coyote, the soft nickering of horses in the stable. "What do you think the next 20 years will bring?" Rose asked eventually. Adam considered the question. "More grandchildren, I hope. Benjamin seems quite taken with Sarah Peterson." "I've noticed," Rose agreed with a smile. "And Maggie will change the world in her own way, mark my words. With you as her mother, I have no doubt," Adam said proudly. "As for Willie, that boy has a gift with words. Wouldn't surprise me to see his novels in bookstores someday." The thought of their children's futures, bright with possibility, filled Rose with joy. From that desperate night in the snow had come all this: a love that had only deepened with time, 3 remarkable children, a prosperous ranch, and a community they had helped to build. "Whatever the future holds," Rose said, turning to look into the eyes of the man who had been her rock, her partner, her lover for 2 decades, "I want to face it exactly as we've faced these past 20 years. Together," Adam said simply. "Together," Rose agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the first stars of evening twinkled overhead, witnesses to a love that had begun in the depths of winter but had bloomed into something as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky above them. As Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, the Thornton family celebrated both the territory's milestone and their own: the birth of their first grandchild, a boy named James, born to Benjamin and his wife Sarah. Watching Adam hold their grandson for the first time, Rose felt the circle of their life together expanding in the most beautiful way. The years continued to flow, bringing joys and sorrows as all years do. They mourned the passing of dear friends Martha Simmons, who had been instrumental in their love story, Joe Miller, who had been Adam's closest friend for decades, and others who had shared their journey. But they also celebrated marriages, births, and achievements that gave richness to their later years. Maggie completed her medical training against considerable odds, becoming one of the first female physicians in Wyoming, and eventually establishing a practice that served the growing community around the Thornton Ranch. Willie published his first novel at 25, a tale of frontier life that drew heavily on the story of his parents' meeting and marriage, though he added adventures and challenges that made Rose laugh and Adam shake his head in amusement. As they entered their golden years, Adam and Rose gradually handed over management of the ranch to Benjamin and his growing family, though Adam still rode out most days to check on the horses that remained his passion. Rose continued to tend her garden and prepare the herbal remedies that had become renowned throughout the county, teaching her knowledge to Maggie's daughter Ruth, who showed the same healing touch. In the spring of 1908, 40 years after the blizzard that had brought them together, Adam and Rose sat on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. At 62, Rose's dark hair had silvered and lines of laughter framed her eyes, but to Adam, she was as beautiful as the young woman he had found in the snow. "Penny for your thoughts," Rose said, noticing Adam's contemplative expression. He smiled, taking her hand in his weathered one. "Just thinking about how fortunate we've been. 40 years together, 3 wonderful children, 7 grandchildren." He gestured to the prosperous ranch spread out before them. "All of this from a chance encounter in a blizzard." "Not chance," Rose corrected gently. "Providence." Adam nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. They had faced challenges over the year's drought seasons that threatened the ranch, a fire that had destroyed part of the stables, illnesses and accidents that were inevitable in frontier life. But through it all, their love had remained constant, a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. "You remember," Adam asked, "that first morning in the cabin when you woke up after the rescue? The first time I saw those beautiful brown eyes open." Rose smiled at the memory. "You were sitting by the bed, looking worried. Your first words were, 'You're awake.' And you asked where you were, and I told you my name," Adam continued. "I didn't know then that I was introducing myself to the woman who would become my entire world. Nor did I imagine that the stranger who saved me would become my husband, the father of my children, the love of my life," Rose added, squeezing his hand. From the yard came the sound of children's laughter as their youngest grandchildren chased each other around the oak tree Adam had planted the year. Benjamin was born now tall and strong, much like their family itself. "Grandpa, Grandma," called 6-year-old Thomas, running toward the porch with something clutched in his small hand. "Look what I found." He opened his palm to reveal a perfectly formed arrowhead, dark stone gleaming in the sunlight. Adam took it carefully, examining the ancient tool with appreciation. "That's a fine find, Thomas," he said, handing it back to the boy. "The people who made this lived here long before any of us, hunting and raising their families on this same land." "Can I keep it?" Thomas asked eagerly. "Of course," Rose replied, "but remember, it's a piece of history. A reminder that others came before us and others will come after." As Thomas ran back to show his cousins his treasure, Adam draped his arm around Rose's shoulders, drawing her close against the cooling evening air. "Others will come after," he repeated thoughtfully. "Do you think they'll remember us, Rose? 100 years from now, will anyone know our story?" Rose considered the question. "Our children will remember, and they'll tell their children who will tell their children." She smiled. "And Willie's book will keep our story alive, even if some of the details are a bit embellished." Adam chuckled. "You mean like the bear attack that never happened, or the band of outlaws I supposedly fought off single-handed?" "Precisely," Rose laughed. "Though I must say, you make a very dashing hero in his version." "I wasn't trying to be a hero that night," Adam said, his voice growing serious. "I was just a man who couldn't bear to see someone suffer when I had the power to help." "That, my love," Rose said softly, "is exactly what makes you a hero to me, to our children, to everyone whose life you've touched." As twilight deepened around them, the stars beginning to emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, Adam and Rose Thornton remained on their porch, surrounded by the legacy of love they had built together, a legacy that had begun with a wagon train that left a young woman behind in the snow, and a determined cowboy who rode back and said, "Not on my watch."